What do you think is going through Mr. Putin's mind this morning?
Well, that's obviously the key question that we're all trying to work out. And I think what we have to appreciate is the extent to which Putin is not the kind of person who fixes himself in a particular track and timetable and rigorously sticks to that. He clearly believes in creating options for himself and then constantly reassessing them. So, I mean, what he will be doing today is we're told that there is this war plan that would actually be triggered on Wednesday. Maybe, maybe not. But on the other hand, he'll be looking at, well, what are the likely costs of actions? What are the likely benefits? So this is it. I mean, I think he will constantly be reassessing that. And I think that is why it's so important that we keep up both the pressure, but also make it clear that there are off-ramps. Because unfortunately, if we give him an option which is essentially between escalation and capitulation, then he will probably escalate.
What does an off-ramp look like in this context? That's a very interesting concept.
Well, what we have to realize is that, first of all, Russia believes that it has some genuine security concerns. Now, we may disagree with a lot of the basic precepts about whether NATO is aggressive and so forth, but just simply telling the Russians that they're wrong is not going to get them to say, oh, my apologies, and we'll back away. So they have to have an opportunity to basically talk through their various issues. Secondly, there are a lot of specific issues, many of which, frankly, the Americans have already brought onto the table, that in some ways what we have to do is talk them up as concessions to the Russians. It may well, and it does, stick in the craw to, in effect, act as President Putin's PR agents. But in some ways, we must get away from a situation in which almost we're trying to push him into a position where he will feel that he's been defeated. And instead, we want him to feel that what we're offering, which does not in any way infringe on Ukrainian sovereignty and the wider European security architecture, but that what is already there actually is a genuine step forward for him. So a lot of this is frankly smoke and mirrors, which is, after all, what diplomacy is often all about.
Well, it's very interesting insight into Mr. Putin's psychology. I talked to Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the Russian billionaire and former friend, I suppose, or associate of Mr. Putin, and he said that he was a little bit paranoid. And Putin once said, I haven't got the quote in front of me, but I think Putin once said that the Russian bear could be quiet, but on the other hand, if it stayed quiet, then its enemies would be tearing its claws and fangs out, and that therefore, I suppose, in a way, they had to be aggressive. What do you think about that assessment, that Putin basically is not just smart, but also paranoid?
I think there is a lot of paranoia in not just Putin, but a lot of the people around him. Remember, these are people in their late 60s and early 70s, a lot of them veterans of the KGB, all of them, though, products of the old Soviet system. So they still have a lot of the old attitudes, and they're also the ones who are probably most caught by the traumatic end of empire, which has metastasized from a what have we lost to a and who took it from us. So yes, there is a very toxic perspective on the West there. But to go back to the point about the Russian bear, is look, unfortunately, the Russians have internalized, rightfully, a sense that the West only pays attention to Russia when Russia causes problems for the West. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. And unfortunately, that means, obviously, without in any way excusing what Putin is doing, we shouldn't be surprised that the Russians continue to make problems for us, because that's how they get our attention. But I think that is the key thing. If all he wanted to do was crack the whip on Ukraine, he could have done it by now. He could have done it much more quickly and with much less of this kind of lengthy, almost theatrical buildup. The fact that we have this is a sign that at least Putin is hoping that he can get something through negotiation rather than having to unleash the troops with all the massive political, economic, and social costs that would involve.
So that really leads us to the key question. How likely do you think an invasion is? It sounds as though you think not very likely.
I mean, that is the question, and unfortunately then no doubt I will be proven wrong, whatever I predict. And I think this is the thing. At the moment, it's only Putin who gets to decide, and we don't know what he's thinking for certain. My view is, look, invasion or some substantial military escalation is not his plan A. He's absolutely hoping to use all these other methods, intimidation, diplomacy, covert attacks, and so forth, to get enough of concessions that he feels that he's actually managed to make his point and put Russia at the center of the world again, which is where he thinks it should be. That doesn't mean, though, that military escalation is not there as a plan B or a plan C as an option. If he really feels that he's not going to get anything anywhere, then anyway, he will probably feel he has little option but to escalate to a degree. Maybe not these kind of apocalyptic scenarios we've been hearing about, rolling the tanks around Kyiv and so forth, but some kind of military escalation just to make a point. But as I said, I think that that's still plan B. If I was going to guess, do I think there's going to be a war on Wednesday? I will say not.
Sorry. Last question, I guess. In this rather delicate balance of decision-making, how helpful is the Defence Secretary's reference to Munich and essentially appeasement?
I mean, I think that's unfortunate, not least because it obviously casts the Russians as Nazi Germany, which, you know, for a country which lost so much in the Second World War, which still calls it the Great Patriotic War, that's a very neuralgic point. But I mean, I think in fairness, the Russians are sophisticated enough to realize that there is the dialogue that you have with your own domestic audience and the dialogue you have with other countries. And in fact, Ben Wallace's visit to Moscow seems to have actually been pretty successful. It was very sober. It wasn't a highly publicized spat. It was actually sort of two people trying to talk about challenges, and also the parallel and very important talks between Chief of the Defense Staff, Admiral Radakin, and his Russian counterpart, General Gerasimov. So, I mean, actually, in those senses, I think Ben Wallace has probably accumulated enough credit that he can be allowed a few rhetorical flourishes as far as Moscow is concerned.